How does it actually feel to have an 8-figure exit and now at least we think you can do whatever you want to do?
At the end of the day, I think that it really hasn't changed a lot except for a lot more mental comfort and freedom. Little things have changed, but not my mindset.
Meet Henry Woodman. He has had one of the most incredible life journeys. Henry is an entrepreneur, angel investor, and the founder of Ice Portal, which was acquired for 8 figures.
What was Ice Portal? How did it even start?
The struggles to get there it's a whole other story.
How did you avoid blinding yourself? Or did you know going into this that there was a great chance you were going to fail? Or were you one of those who was like, I'm not going to fail?
No, I never thought I wasn't going to fail. I'm eternally sort of, I would say optimistic, but I want to persevere. I don't want to.
Henry, let me just start off. I think Michael and I are both very jealous because you basically can do whatever you want now after this lucrative exit. So the first thing that we're curious, because we always probably imagine a day like this or fantasize about it and kind of think that it's going to feel a certain way. But how does it actually feel to have an 8-figure exit and now at least we think you can do whatever you want to do?
Yeah, I haven't had the need or the interest yet to use that F word for the FU money thing, but it hasn't come into play. But let me be honest. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that it really hasn't changed a lot except for a lot more mental comfort and freedom. I don't think much more about, can I afford this? Or do I fly business class or stuff that, before was like, what moron would spend $5,000 for a business class ticket? And then you go up there and you're like, okay, I kind of get it. If you can afford it, so little things have changed, but not my mindset, if that makes sense.
I think that makes sense. I feel like I'd be like, I'm buying a jet now.
No. I would not buy. I mean, if I had real serious, like 10, 12 figures, like a Jeff Bezos, what's a jet? He's got 4 of them now. I mean, come on. But at the end of the day, I think there's a certain number that you can have that can set you free, if you will, for the rest of your life. And that's kind of where I came up with my number. I looked at it, talked to my brother, and I said, how much would we need to live the rest of our lives without ever having to worry about money? Right? So we put a number down. And then I doubled that because, you're not always that smart and shit happens. And essentially added 30% for taxes and, other miscellaneous stuff. And that was the number was on my mirror for a decade. And it was one of those, I don't have to worry. And now it's like turning the chapter and doing some passionate thing that I really wanted to do 40 years ago, but didn't make me the money at the time.
So let's talk about the company. I think the company was called Ice Portal, right?
Correct.
So what was Ice Portal and how did it even start?
So I'll give you the acronym. ICE is an acronym for Internet Content Exchange, and it's a software technology. And simply put, if you go to any travel website, Expedia, Travelocity, Booking.com, literally any site on the planet, and you see photos of a hotel, Wyndham's, Hyatt's, Hilton's, whatever, those photos would have come from Ice Portal because we would collect, manage, size, tag, categorize, and send it to all the travel sites on the planet, right? So that's what the business does, which is great because it was a SaaS company and it's a huge moat. But how it came to be and the struggles to get there is a whole other story. I'm in Chile producing game shows at the time. Somebody introduces me to this new 360-degree virtual tour, and I thought, that is the coolest thing ever. I can travel around, shoot virtual tours for destinations and hotels, and this is a fantasy, because I used to do travel films with a bunch of guys and all this luggage. And so I set up a company called World Travel Vision, and this is about the mid-90s. We're producing the 360-degree virtual tours for the travel industry, right? Called World Travel Vision. And eventually, I'd give the hotels a CD-ROM, they'd take it to a trade show and conference and promote their product, right? And eventually they said, so how do we get these virtual tours on this new World Wide Web thingy? I'm like, I don't know, send them a CD-ROM. Mind you, I know nothing about technology. Didn't then, still really, I couldn't write a line of code if you paid me, right? So I said, send them a CD-ROM. And they said, yeah, there's no standards. They don't know what to do with it. So I said, well, let me see what I can do to help. So we then looked into how do we distribute the virtual tours to the various travel websites, the big ones at the time, Orbitz, Travelocity, Expedia, right? And there were all the sub tour operators. And I thought, okay, well, let's distribute the virtual tours. We'll put a header and a footer and we'll link it out and send the links to the travel sites. And as we're looking into this, we realized that that's nice to have virtual tours. The need to have are photos. And that was a problem because the old reservation systems, they could give you the rate and the availability, but they never had pictures. You know, if you're old enough and you went to a brick and mortar travel agency on the corner, they had these green screens with cryptic text. There were no pictures, right? So the internet comes along and they need to show pictures. This creates a problem. Now, it's not that big a deal early on because, you know, you're dialing up with 28.8 or 56K modem, but eventually they need to standardize picture size, tagging, categorizing. The big groups needed to have their IP in line and, you know, here are our quality standards and stuff like that. So we realized, okay, so we pivoted from production of virtual tours to distribution of virtual tours. Let's get into managing and delivering photos. And so that started in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And it took about 20 years to build and connect and you know, convince people that we were not going to be, you know, gone in a year, right? And sold it in 2019.
Wow, amazing. So wait, you said how many years total? Right, exactly. How many years total then did you say it was from start to selling?
Oh, it was about 25 years, you know, with World Travel Vision and stuff, so maybe a little bit longer.
Yeah. So which is what we refer to today as overnight. So that was, you know, that's your overnight success.
Yeah, it was an overnight success. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mortgaged my house. I was about bankrupt multiple times,
Right.
but it happened overnight.
Exactly.
Can you talk about the early days, Henry, of when the actual thinking about hiring a team and you knew that you were beyond, you knew there was a product here and you had solved the problem. Now it's okay, well, how do we build a team around this? Like, at what point did you know you got to hire, and how big did the company end up being from a, you know, headcount standpoint?
Yeah, let me start with the hiring. First, conceptually at least, I thought, okay, I need to build a technology platform. Now, we had crappy technology on a I don't know if they still have Cold Fusion, where we would deliver the virtual tours. And that was relatively simplistic, right? We would host it and deliver it. But I wanted to go and do something that was far more scalable and reliable with big numbers, meaning lots of traffic, right? So there was a group that had recently left Microsoft. They obviously know big numbers, and they set up their own consulting firm, three Russian guys. And so I got really lucky because I didn't know how to evaluate a tech guy. So I said, listen, you guys, you know, you sound like you know what you're doing. You came from Microsoft, right? You're setting up your own consulting firm. I was their first client. And I said to them, I don't have a lot of money, right? I am going to pay you, you know, chicken scratch wages, but I'm going to give you some equity in the company. They believed in the vision. So they gave me a 4-year deal where they built out the platform. They got equity in the company. I paid them barely enough to survive. And ultimately, you know, we didn't really grow the company as much as we tried to get the hotels, the hotel groups, not individual hotels, but like we'd call Wyndham, right? And get them to sign up because, you know, one contract, you've got 9,700 hotels, right? That's not an easy task, right? You have to plant those seeds and it takes years. Now, I had no idea what I was doing. Honestly, I didn't know, you know, when people say you need to hire the best people, and I'm thinking, I can't even afford to pay myself. You want me to hire people I can't afford? What are you talking about, right? Or you need to have KPIs. I'm like, I don't know what that means, right? Okay, yeah, now I do, but at the time I was like, you know, culture, huh? What is that? You know, vision? I want to make money, right? So first, I went back to school and I got my MBA in entrepreneurship because now I'm actually motivated to learn than when I was in college 40 years earlier. And somebody handed me a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. And it was such an eye-opening read for me. We even had our backdoor password called Gino Wickman. I told him that because it became our Bible. And the six people in the company at the time, I said, read this book. This is our Bible. We're going to do everything it says. When it says, here's how to do a vision, here's how to get a culture, here's what a KPI and a scorecard looks like, we're going to do that, right? And that really helped us foundationally build processes and procedures to help us scale. So we started with me and the one person that was with me early on in production. And then I had a production partner who I said, listen, we're going to build this technology. We can't pay ourselves for the better part of a year. So how can you do that? And he's like, no, he was a younger guy. And he said, no. And I said, okay, I'll buy you out, which was probably the smartest thing I ever did. And I went on by myself and started to sort of put these elements together. We would produce virtual tours that would pay for the technology. So the technology didn't do anything for years except deliver virtual tours, which wasn't really a high ticket item. The delivery of photos in SaaS, it's a recurring revenue stream, and it was like a 68% net margin. So it was a great little business. You have literally a handful of clients that have 60, 70,000 hotels.
Is that still how some of the big chains get their images?
So what happens is chains control their own sort of standards, right? So if you go to Wyndham, as I mentioned earlier, or Hilton, right? They have standards of what they look like, some without pictures, without people, some, different things, sizes and tags. And they say, okay, you have to get the rights to those images. You can't just have a photographer take it. You have to sign off on everything. Once they have those rights, they put it in their database, and it's mapped to an ID number for each of their hotels. We pull it down from their database. We map the IDs from their hotels to every single other travel site because they're all different, right? And the room types may also be different. One may have a breakfast included room category, another may have it called a standard room in the US and a superior room in Europe. So they have different anomalies for all these different sites. We had to know all of that, and that was really the technology. But once you contract with one client, you essentially are responsible to pull down their images every day. If there are any changes, added, deletes, updates, then you send it to the travel sites. They're called deltas, right? And then you update accordingly. And within a day or two, everybody's got the same images. So it all looks uniform across all the platforms.
Interesting. I would never have thought. I think you answered a question that I had last night, because I was looking at some hotels and I can see that they're on their own site, each room was called something. On Expedia, it was the same, but then I went to a smaller site and the room names were completely different. So I couldn't tell that this cheaper room, was it the same room or not? So now I get it.
It's a marketing thing, and it's kind of frustrating too. But, there are also some sites that would say, well, we want the best stuff on our site because that's where people will go. And people don't even know any better now. They'll go to a Kayak or, one of these meta sites and, find out.
I'm curious, is the technology, or rather was the revenue generated from the software, from the collating and making sure all these things lined up, or from the actual capturing of any of these images, or at different points in your business life cycle, was it each of those?
Right. Well, early on, we were taking pictures, the virtual tours, if you will, and then sometimes we'd do photography, but that was really limited. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of hotels and rooms, right? And we had millions of images. Eventually, as we, like in any business, you're looking for opportunity, right? You look and you say yes to everything. Eventually, when you find something that you believe is good, you then learn to say no to everything else. So early on, we would produce, then we would produce and distribute, and then we would distribute, and then we got out of virtual tours and we just focused on photos. So the money is made really on per hotel for the software service.
It makes sense. It's a scalable piece of all of that because it's hard to scale.
Oh, yeah. It's marginal cost. Yeah. Once you've got the technology built, it's marginal. When you add additional hotels, it's like fractions of a penny.
You mentioned the person that, was bought out, and then you mentioned some of the other people, the equity deals and how you approach that. But so when you finally did in Traction, by the way, I've read that they've got a whole set of books all related to Traction. Love them. I actually think anybody who's going to be going into, or even heck, I was corporate America, anywhere, it's so valuable. Even just when you start thinking about the difference between the visionary and the integrator and those relationships. I mean, wow, I think that would increase business success tenfold if people just look at those books alone.
I agree. Especially if you sit there and you think you know what you're doing, you may not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We were having an exchange right before this where you had mentioned that people who come into it and they're like, I know, chances of success might be at, less than 90% or whatever it is, but people who come in too confident and say, but I'm not going to be one of those. It's like, well, you want to make sure you don't blind yourself to the things that are going to come your way. How did you avoid blinding yourself? Or did you know going into this that there was a great chance you were going to fail? Or were you one of those who was like, I'm not going to fail?
No, I never thought I wasn't going to fail. I'm eternally sort of, I would say optimistic, but I want to persevere. I don't want to quit. I'm sort of, my tenacity and discipline says, okay, I'm going to hang in there. There were multiple times where we were on the verge of bankruptcy, right? There were multiple times I had mortgaged my house to pay for the employees. And I thought, you know what? And I would tell people, I said, listen, if this does not work out, my next question to you would be, do you want fries with that burger? I mean, I don't have a backup plan. So one of the things that I think helped me is learning how to pivot and learning to be patient and plant seeds. And that's a hard thing to learn when you need money.
Can you talk about some of the challenges, Henry? Going and almost bankrupt several times. That's a tough thing to swallow. Can you just walk us through all those challenges? And then, if you knew you were going to have these challenges, would you go back and do it again, or was it worth it?
I would certainly go back and do it again, but I would do it differently because now that I know where the challenges and the hurdles came, I would avoid them. And the primary hurdle was early on when we were doing virtual tours, we partnered with a company that was doing photo collection and distribution. There was another company doing video distribution, and they raised a ton of VC money, and they bought the other photo distribution company. So they wanted to corner the market. And honestly, they kind of did. They signed exclusive deals with what's called the GDSs, the global distribution systems like Sabre and Amadeus. These are the guys that control most of the distribution. And so we were pretty much left outside, and I knew it. And I thought, okay, it ain't going to work. Starwood, however, said, we like you guys. They kind of saw the writing on the wall and said, if these guys get the monopoly, we're going to be at a loss. They're going to be able to dictate pricing and stuff. So can you guys do photos? And we lied and we said, sure, sort of. So we kind of had to work through trying to do everything manually on behalf of Starwood, right? We waited 5 years for the exclusive contracts to end. But in the meantime, we called every hotel group. We met them at conferences. I traded my photography guys to do photos at conferences for a free booth and stuff like that. And we'd go to these conferences and I'd ask people, I'd say, listen, we're going to do this. We're building this platform. Tell me what's working for you, what's not working, what you like, what you don't like with the current provider, right? That way, if the time comes and those exclusives wind down and I'm given the opportunity to deliver, I'll have a platform that satisfies all of those needs. And that's exactly what happened. So when the last exclusive ended, we went from 1,000 hotels at Starwood. Within about a year, a little less than a year, we were at 23,000 hotels. So there was a lot of pent up frustration with the other vendor because they weren't innovating and they weren't listening to the client because, for lack of a better term, they were a monopoly and they didn't care, right? So we came and sort of fixed some of the problems that they didn't like and streamlined it and tried to listen to as much of what the client needed as possible.
How much of that listening to what the customer needs would you say attributed to the success of Ice Portal?
Well, I'd say, besides going back and learning stuff that I didn't learn in college and reading the book and stuff, I think it was a huge opportunity to understand, not only because I was listening, and I was planting the seeds, and they knew there was the potential of having another option out there in a couple of years, right? And we would always say, well, listen, when that time comes up, well, by the way, when are you guys renewing? Because they had 2-year contracts and stuff. So we kind of knew well in advance where we would position our efforts, right? And, we sort of learned a lot of the frustrations they were feeling from the client and seeing how we can remove those and make it frictionless.
So Henry, I mean, you early on you mentioned how you had a number on a mirror or a board for about 10 years. At what point did you start thinking about the exit strategy, and when did you actually start the process of an acquisition?
Yeah, well, it was more of a fortuitous, wow, I can't believe it happened. But what happened was, I knew what I needed because the number was on the wall. I didn't really plan on, okay, eventually I'm going to have to think about the tax implications. I'm going to have to prepare stuff. And so I was thinking of these processes, right? We were anal about documentation. Everything was well documented because I would tell the team, I said, imagine we're going to open up an affiliate or a franchise in Europe, and they can never talk to you. They have to read and totally understand and see what the hell we're doing, right? And so we'd have these living documents, and it would tell exactly what was going on. So, as we started to grow and grow, we were approached by strategic buyers, and they would express interest. And I said, yeah, I'm always interested. The door's always open. And I said, but, I need to be at a higher revenue because I need this, 6 to 8 times EBITDA because, that gets me to my number. And so I tell them, and they walk away. And so this one company, they walked away, and a month later they called and they said, can we meet in Atlanta? They fly in the CFO and the COO, and it's a multi-billion-dollar company. And so they start throwing out all these numbers. And I say, listen, guys, I'm going to be honest with you. I make pretty good money because we were doing well at the time. I don't have a boss. I don't have a board. I don't have any debt. I sleep well at night. Why would I sell the company unless I get my number, right? I was not in a rush at the time, right? And I said, yeah, that's the only place to be, really, if you want. And I basically said, listen, you'll overpay today for something you'll underpay for tomorrow. And I really believe that. And then I shut up, which was hard, and which was probably 5 seconds, but felt like a minute and a half. They looked at each other and they go, fine, you got a deal. And so no investment banker. 60 days later, the attorneys hashed out the agreement. Money was in the bank. And so I was incredibly lucky because I was in a very strong position to get what I wanted. They were, instead of build, we can't build because it will take years to integrate with all these companies. So we'll pay a premium and we'll buy. And that's exactly what happened. And by the way, this was a year before COVID. So you can imagine what hospitality looked like a year later. It was decimated. And, these multi-billion-dollar companies would call and say, we need some relief. Help us out. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Wow. Yeah, they didn't have a lot of runway because you turn off every single revenue source on the planet Earth, but they still have to pay for their bills. That's a problem.
You mentioned having the number that you had wrote early on. What made you think about things in terms of visualizing that future? And did you do it in other ways? Because some people are big on the idea of you got to know what you want, visualize that, write that number down, talk to yourself every day in the mirror. Like, what was your approach to that?
Yeah, it was more realistic. I wasn't planning on buying jets and yachts and things. I said, okay, how do I live comfortably with a pretty good lifestyle and never have to worry, even if I don't even make money on the money, which is now amazes me how much money is making on the money. But if I make nothing, can I live with that amount for the rest of my life? And the answer was, yeah, right? So that was it. It wasn't a matter of saying, I want to drive a Ferrari, I want to go on a jet, I want to buy a jet. It was, live comfortably, have the things that you need to not worry and have financial freedom.
And what I mean a little bit more is just the approach to how you were envisioning that future. Like some people, again, call it the secret, call it anything else out there. Sometimes people are like, you got to visualize what you want of a future. So I'm just curious if anything inspired you to think in those terms, or if it's just a fluke, you just wrote it down.
No, it was always I knew I would at some point have to sell. And the other thing is I kind of, when people tell you, oh my God, I can't wait to retire and go sit on a beach and do nothing. I'm like, yeah, okay. Especially entrepreneurs. In a week, you'll be like, okay, what's next, right? There's no way you can just do nothing if you have the mindset that you like to go, go, go. So I knew, I bought the rights to a book 40 years earlier, and I knew I wanted to publish the book and then develop a TV series from that concept. It's not a business that I would think, oh, I'm going to make a fortune in television. Nah, not really. Only 1% do, right? But it is a passion project that I can now do without having to worry about, oh my God, I need a payday. I need to, So it is, okay, what's next? I'll sell this. I'll do what I really want to do and develop this TV series. So that was kind of the goal.
Well, I think we mentioned before that you and I are living mine and Michael's dream, coming from film and television backgrounds, and we always thought, let's do something, make a lot of money, so we can actually go back and make some of the stuff that we were talking about in our 20s. So we definitely envy your position.
It is sad because, I do talk to some producers and like, yeah, that's the way to do it because, we're like, we make a little bit of money on on a production and then we got to go look for the next. Yeah, that's constantly looking for that work. And I get it. Right. And it's a sexy business, but it's not one that people go in and go, I'm going to seek my fortune, unless you're very, very lucky.
It's sexy from the outside. When you're on the inside, It's brutal. Going back to the acquisition, I'm curious. I've been involved in mergers and acquisitions. Michael has been involved too. Once that deal is signed, there's still a lot of work that happens after to hand off the company to the buyer. What was your involvement after the deal was signed, and how long did you stay on to actually help with the process to onboard or offload all the processes to the new owners?
That's a great question. And just so when they do the due diligence and they set up what's called a data room, right? They have like 3 pages of not single line stuff that they want, right? A lot of stuff. Within 24, 40 hours, all of that was uploaded to the data room. And I said, they've never seen it that way. Why? Because we had everything really well organized and documented because I was anal about the documentation. So one of the things that they requested was that I stay on for 2 years in transition, which was fine by me. I'm like, fine. Most people that do that are only there sort of physically, mentally, they're probably somewhere else. But soon thereafter, COVID came, right? So now I'm not even working in the office anymore, right? I'm still at the company. I'm getting paid and I'm off doing my own little thing. I'm, going to buy my house and upgrade stuff. And I really wasn't at the office. And ironically, they were going to give me a couple $1 million for these contracts. I said, I don't want the money. I'm good. I got what I wanted. Give it to the employees. And they couldn't believe that I was going to give that much money to the employees if we get the contracts. And because of COVID, everybody was put on furlough and, nothing happened tech-wise. So we didn't get that. But the transition was because of COVID, it was pretty much, we just sit around and twiddle our thumbs because nobody was doing anything for a while. Right. And then I left the company.
Wow. Well, strange times, for sure, indeed. I want to get into some just general questions, but kind of what strengths do you feel that made you a good entrepreneur? Not that you're still not an entrepreneur, but what are the strengths that you think made you and anybody else would make a good entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think there's discipline and tenacity, definitely, because I come from a background as a swimmer, so we're very disciplined in swimming and working out and stuff. And tenacity and competitiveness, obviously, I think swimming plays a part in that as well. But you kind of listen. I was born in the U.S. in the '60s, white guy in the middle class. How bad could I screw that up, right? If I have a little bit of some talent, some tenacity, and luck, I got it's a pretty good recipe. So I'm going to say discipline and tenacity. And listen, when I talk to small businesses and I coach them, I say, listen, there's In order to find opportunity, you really need to be standing on the corner of prepared and lucky. Because you can be lucky all day long. If you're not prepared, you may not see opportunity. Or you can be prepared all day long. If you're not lucky, you may not see opportunity. So be prepared, hope for luck, and you might see opportunity.
Can you kind of drill into that? I mean, what does prepared mean to you?
Well, prepared essentially means know what you're doing, know what the business does, know what your competitors do, know what works, right? Prepare the documentation, prepare the processes, know your numbers, know that the cash flow is working. I mean, if you're prepared and you know the business, as opposed to saying, I saw these guys on Instagram, they made $1 billion after a year. I want to do that. What? That's luck. That's not it. Most people don't understand the amount of work and effort to build a business and get people to row in the same direction as you. And in many cases, to accept a lower wage than they might have gotten somewhere else just because they believe in what you're doing. And I would help some of, my key employees, I would give them what's called phantom stock, right? Which is essentially, I plan to sell the company. I know you're probably not getting paid as much as you would, but I want to reward you. I can't afford to pay you now. I'm going to give you stock in the company when the company sells. Now, it will also vest over 2 years. That helps them with like a bonus payout. It helps the acquiring company saying, oh, the intellectual property, the talent in the company, they're not going any for 2 years if they want that money. That's correct. They can keep them around. If they don't want them around, they get that money right away. It's an escrow. If they decide they don't want to stay, I get the money. So it's a win-win-win in order to retain the client and the customers, and keep the client sort of placated, thinking, I'm going to have the talent I need in order to do this transition properly.
I don't think I've ever heard of it that way, but that sounds a very clever way to do it.
Yeah, because you don't want them to say, listen, I sold the company, we're all cashing out, and everybody just scatters like cockroaches. No, they're going to stay there because they get tranches every 6 months to vest over 2 years. So they're not going anywhere. And the client's happy because they know where all the dead bodies are lying.
It's the same. I won't call it, trick sounds wrong, because it is actually a benefit to be able to have. But that they did at Disney for us, Arton. Ours took X amount of years to vest in order to make sure we were sticking around, or at least knew the impact. Also, if we didn't,
I think what I assume from Henry is, let's say if the company was acquired in 2019, somebody, and Henry, correct me if my understanding is wrong, you might have issued this stock in 2010, but they didn't get it until 2019 when it's signed, and then it took another 2 years to vest after that, right?
That's exactly right. So
let's just very different, Michael, from like a typical.
Okay. That's a lot longer of a time frame too.
Well, yeah, I mean, 2010 would have been, let's just say 2010, I don't have a lot of money. I'm paying you, Arton, and I'm saying, listen, I think you're worth more. I want to keep you longer. I'm going to let you vest the shares I'm going to give you. Let's just say 3% of the company. I will vest that over 2 years. So if you leave early, if you leave, you get nothing. If you die, whoever you want inherits that money. But then 10 years later, let's say, or 9 years later, I sell the company. In order to get that money, you're going to get paid out over 2 years now. So you vest to get the shares, and you also vest to be paid out.
I haven't heard that model before. That's pretty, I think, brilliant and clever for both sides. It's a win-win.
Thank you. I don't know where I came up with that.
Yeah, no, I like it. Touching on opportunities again, even when we were talking about earlier, you seem to have a knack for either identifying opportunities or having opportunities just show up on your door, but you actually are prepared to do something with it. So if somebody is starting, there is no business, they're trying to figure out, what should I get into? What kind of mindsets does somebody have to be able to identify opportunities rather than just things flying by and they have no clue that they just lost $1 million opportunity?
Well, a couple of things, and I'll give you some examples of how it happened. I think being in a certain place and time and being aware is really important, right? And when I'm in college, right, this is the late 70s, I'm in a laundromat. I have a pocket full of quarters. I have an addiction to Pac-Man, right? I want a Pac-Man there, and they don't have it. So instead of saying, oh my God, somebody should do something, I go back to my dorm. I call every laundromat in Tucson, where I went to college, and I ask them if they have video game machines. They all said no. I said, you want one? A couple said, yeah. So I didn't have any money. I took my school funding and I went and I bought a used, outdated video game. And by the time I graduated college, I had video games in laundromats around Tucson, right? That's not because, oh my God, I just happened to be there with a problem that I wanted to satisfy for myself. Then I'm out doing travel films and I'm traveling around. I do a film in Chile. And then I hear that Chile goes from a dictatorship with Pinochet to a democracy. And what happens? They add new television stations and a new TV network. So that means they're looking for content, right? Opportunity. So I called the guy in Chile who did our support services and I said, listen, you got a production company. Can we set up a meeting with this new TV network? And he says, yeah, I fly to Chile. I package an idea for a show. Within a couple of months, we're on the air with a new TV show. Nobody's going to go down there unless there's an opportunity and they need content. And here I am billing myself as an American producer, right? So you're looking around and saying, okay, what's interesting to me? What problem is there that I'm not seeing or that I can help solve, right? Or what better mousetrap can I build? The last thing I want is, oh my God, I love clothing. I'm gonna put a boutique on Main Street. What? Is that a problem? I mean, really? Right? I mean, nothing against people who do that, but if you really want to find an opportunity, is it a problem? And is it something you can build or do better? Right? And is it also something you can scale? Because that's another challenge.
I think something you just said there.
I hope that helped answer that whole.
Yeah, no, it definitely helps. And I actually think it is really interesting, even though you use the example of a boutique. But if you look at some of the businesses that fail, have a higher chance of failure, it's often retail and food industry. And I think it's because sometimes people who are pursuing those, they're not solving a problem. They're following a passion or something that they want to do versus the problem. So I think that's brilliant what you said and how you captured it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I love the laundromat story. So if you can go back in time and have a conversation with your younger self, what advice would you give him?
I first of all, when I was younger and I didn't have far to fall, if I failed, so what, right? I don't have a house, a mortgage, a family. What do I care, right? I got people who love me. I got my health. I got a roof. I got food, whatever, right? Later in life with Ice Portal, and I had a house and I had a family and I had a mortgage and I mortgaged my house. It was a lot further to fall. And so I would lose a lot of sleep. And I'd like to say I'd lose hair, but I really don't. Still have a lot of hair.
Lucky.
I would look back and I would say, try not to stress as much. Try to be more grateful for, just you're healthy. You can eat food. You have a roof. You have a bed. You have stuff that, like 80% of the world would aspire to do. What are you stressing so much for? And I would try, this is really, really, really hard to do, is not stress as much. And even if I told myself at the time, hey, just try to relax, it'll all be fine. I'm like, the world's coming to an end,
In that kind of same vein, what is something that you thought was important in your 20s that you now realize it's not that important?
Oh, pretty much everything. Listen, I would buy cars I couldn't afford to impress people I don't know. Now this is my fourth Genesis. Since I sold the company, I'm not interested in trying to impress anybody with a shiny Ferrari or anything. But I guarantee you, in my younger days, if I could have afforded to somebody give me a Ferrari and I'd be heavily in debt, I would do it. Maybe try to get laid or something. I don't know, but I think that the mindset changes when like you see these people that are very wealthy and they're in jeans and a hoodie, and the others that are wearing gold chains and fancy clothes and expensive watches and shoes, probably all, living on the edge and all in debt. So I think that mindset for me changed, is like, I just want to be comfortable and happy. Granted, I don't want to fly in the back like a sardine, but if I can afford to go up, yeah, so it's a different mindset, I think.
For you, how important is it, do you think, or for anybody, to really love what they do? Because taking it back to what you said a moment ago, where you were just mentioning that you were solving a problem. Well, you fell in love with solving the problem, it sounds like. And maybe that's what's more important that people do. But do you think it's important that people have a really big passion for whatever it is that they're going to pursue?
Not always. And I say that because I didn't have a passion for technology or running a business. I didn't even I didn't even take business classes in college. I wish I had. I wish I would have been more into the, legal and accounting, which I was really weak on. So I did my passions early, as a hedonist. I wanted to travel and travel films and production and game shows and, doing video games and laundromats. That was hedonistic. And the other business with Ice Portal was more of an opportunistic, okay, I can probably do something that rolls in, make a little bit of money because geez, who the hell knows what else I'm going to do. But it depends on if you put yourself out there. Because I didn't know anything about business and I didn't really know how to run a business, I went back and I got my MBA and I read the book and I thought, okay, I'm going to master this, right? It's almost a challenge for me. I don't know that I really enjoyed it as a passion of what I want to do with my life. But once I understood business and how I can excel, then I got more passionate about it.
Makes sense. And now you are taking it back to where it all started, pursuing your passion of producing again.
Yep, as they say, I'm turning the page to the next chapter. I like I said, I got the rights to a book 40 years ago. I just published it. It's called The Reincarnation of Marie. And it essentially is the concept for the TV show we're developing called Slippin', which is slipping through time. And it's based on a real woman who existed in the late 1800s called Marie Barsh-Gersef. And she wrote a journal between 14 and 24. And at 24, she died of tuberculosis. 2 years later, her mom publishes the journal. It's an international bestseller. 70 years later, guy picks up the journal and he starts reading and he's very interested, very intrigued, and eventually finds himself falling in love with this dead woman. And he's like, oh my God, this is crazy. I've fallen in love with a dead woman. And eventually he finds her reincarnation. That's kind of the simplistic version of the book. But what happens with the TV show is we really do a deeper dive into the previous lives in Marie's era and the current life of our protagonist and how the lives intertwine. They talk about karma and sins of the father and does reincarnation exist or soulmates, and is any of this, resonating? Do we have any of this, or is this all there is we have? So we don't answer the questions, we sort of touch those topics.
You said you acquired the book 40 years ago, but is that when it was written?
Yeah, it was written a little longer than 40 years ago, but yeah, it's a personal story. And you're going to go, okay, Henry, what the hell was it? When I moved to Los Angeles thinking I was going to produce and direct, my father, who was a travel writer and a nonfiction writer, wrote a manuscript, sort of a tribute to a friend of his. He's moving. He's got this, manuscript sitting in the garage. My sister sees it. She's helping him move. She asks him about it. He explains it's this love story tribute about a friend. And she says, wow, it sounds interesting. Can I read it? She reads it. She falls in love with it. She calls me and she says, you've got to read this. Dad wrote a love story. And we're like, yeah, whatever, Dad, that lecherous pig. Come on. And so I read it. I couldn't put it down. I was in tears. And I called him up and I said, listen, Dad, I don't have a lot of money. I'll give you $1 to make it legal. He goes, well, I wasn't really planning on doing anything with it anyway. So yeah, have at it. And, I thought, how nepotistic of me. This was written by my dad. So a friend of mine at the time is producing a movie, and I call him up and I say, listen, you got to read this and tell me what you think. He says, Henry, I'm in the middle of a movie. I said, yeah, but take your time. 3 days later, he calls me up because I couldn't put it down. I love this. We are meant to do this. Well, I went off to Chile to produce game shows. He went into the real estate business because Vestron Video at the time didn't do him right. And I said, one of these days we're going to come around to this. So I said, when I sell Ice Portal, we're going to, publish the book, and then we're going to convert from a movie to a TV series so we can do a much deeper dive. And so that's how it all
really good. That's just amazing. I feel like we can probably talk for hours just about that because you're right up our alley. But one more question, this more personal question I have for you. What's one big mistake you made early on or during Ice Portal that you feel like you learned the most valuable lesson from?
Honestly speaking, there were so many challenges and hurdles, mistakes that I learned from. I think the biggest would have been not totally understanding an agreement that was signed that I ended up, because I'm not a lawyer, And I ended up doing things that we should have known in the agreement that we shouldn't have done, or we should have gone to, because it was a legal issue. I think the biggest thing is to understand clearly the legalities of what is in a contract.
I think lawyers out in the world are clapping right now for you.
Yeah,
Hire us.
yeah, they're like, yeah, we need more money. Bring it on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Henry, this definitely has been one of the most fascinating conversations Mike and I have had. I think we'd probably want to have more conversations like this, because we personally, I've learned a bunch of stuff from you today. So how can people find you if they're interested to reach out to you?
I think the easiest way, as I mentioned in the book, we have a website called mariethestory.com, and that has information on me, my father, the author, the production, Slippin', and at the bottom of all of that, there's my LinkedIn page, my Facebook page, my Instagram page. So you can find all that stuff there. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out, and you'll find everything on Marie the Story.
Yeah, and definitely if you guys watching or listening want to get in touch with Henry, you can always contact us and we'll connect you. And if you like this episode, please subscribe. Thank you, Henry. This has been awesome. And we'll see you guys on the next episode.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. It was great.